agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carlson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, I got nothing really. I'm afraid nothing witty.
All right. Well, we have a lot we want to get to today. It is the 1-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I want to talk a little about Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy's interesting deal with Fox News' Tucker Carlson on those January 6th surveillance tapes, and a couple of interesting Supreme Court cases as well. So as always, we have a lot we want to talk about, and we're going to get to it in just 1 second. So, Jay, before we start with Russia's invasion at the 1-year mark, there's sort of an update. Last week on the show, listeners might recall that one of the topics we talked about was mental health, cognitive capabilities of elected officials. And it's in the light of the John Fetterman thing and Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden, concerns about, at least from the right, about his cognitive abilities. Well, Nikki Haley, in her presidential announcement last week, said, "In the America I see, the permanent politician will finally retire. We'll have term limits for Congress and mandatory mental competency tests for politicians over 75 years old." Now, Donald Trump responded to this on Truth Social by saying anybody, all caps, running for the office of President of the United States should agree to take a full and complete mental competency test simultaneously or before with the announcement that he or she is running, and likewise, but to a somewhat lesser extent, agree to a test which would prove that you are physically capable of doing the job. Being an outstanding president requires great mental acuity and physical stamina. If you don't have these qualities or traits, it is likely you won't succeed. MAGA. So there you go.
There really ought to be something sort of like an NFL combine kind of thing, right?
I like a Wonderlic test for candidates. Now, of course,
timing everybody in the 40, and then you have so many, passes to complete, and maybe an obstacle course or something.
I would pay to see Donald Trump do a cone drill, but that's another story. But it's interesting. Nikki Haley, I think there was one point at which she was considered a serious person, I suppose, by some people. But in the America she sees, she suggested two unconstitutional things, right? Term limits for Congress and mandatory mental competency tests for politicians over 7. So I guess in the America,
I suppose they could be constitutional if you amended the Constitution to say that.
There you go.
Yes, yeah.
But what do you think? I mean, last week when we were talking about this, I said it seems strange to me in a way that more candidates aren't calling for this sort of thing. And then Nikki Haley was clearly listening to the show last week, I guess decided she would. And Donald Trump sort of doubled down. And what do you make of this? Do you think this is the start of anything, or are these just it's just a sort of empty bluster that's not going to lead to anything?
No, this is the campaign statement to remind everyone I'm not old. Right. I don't know that she's seriously considering this sort of thing. As you said, I think would be unconstitutional. As I said last week, I think there are a whole host of other problems that go with it, even if it were constitutional. I think it is drawing a demarcation as to, you don't want to contradict Donald Trump on policy, on being Donald Trump and so forth. And this is a way that you can sort of take a shot at Biden and Trump at the same time. Essentially saying you're old, which is true, and differentiate herself from Trump without necessarily turning off the Trumpists. That's my read on it. I mean, I don't think it's again a serious platform type piece, right? This is early, just campaign positioning sort of stuff and trying to stake out the lane of I am in the youth and vigor lane,
Right. And anyone, and of course, even if this were to be the case, Haley is 51, so she wouldn't be subject to this thing she's calling the old folks to be subject to. Right. So, but do you think that if somebody said,
which can I just interject something? Is it weird? Because this to me seems like, for you and me, this is like the first time I recall serious presidential candidates being younger than myself.
This is what happens when we get old.
And yourself.
Yeah.
I know.
Sure.
I mean, Barack Obama was young, but he was still older than me and you. And he was younger than I am now when he took office. But this is it's one of those things. Yeah, it's sort of, I had the same feeling. There came a point in my life where the sports figures, that I watched and cheered for. I mean, growing up as a kid, they're all grown ups and they're men and adults, and then all of a sudden you're older than they are.
It happens. Yep.
That's neither here nor there, and I apologize for the.
No, not at all. I think reflections.
It's one of those weird reflections. I never thought I'd notice this, but here it is.
Sure, yeah, reflections on age and mortality, and before long, we and everyone we know will be dead and forgotten, and the universe will end up becoming just a cold, entropic sort of nothing, and happy February.
No one will, and no one will particularly care who the nominee in 2024
exactly. So in that sense, we maybe get too worked up over this. All right. So
no, but I do actually. I mean, to some extent, it's a little bit of a serious point too, in that you and I are both early 50s. I'll admit that over there. I mean, but I still feel like, despite my vast intellect and lengthy and expensive and broad-based education, that I would feel totally unequipped to be president at my age. You know what I mean?
Really?
Don't you still feel that?
No, not at all. I feel like I could step in a job.
You're ready to take the job. Okay.
Absolutely. President, Supreme Court Justice. Yeah, I'll fit. Give me a couple of weeks to get up to speed and a few good advisors, and I'm sure I'd be fine. Absolutely. So, lack of confidence has never been my issue for sure.
Gotcha. So. Anyway, it just strikes me as weird as one of my peers, right? Is like, now running for president. That's someone of my own age group.
There you go. Now, if you went back in time a little bit, of course, there'd be plenty of younger folks, but not plenty. More than a few. But anyway, so
that's neither here nor there. My point is, I think Haley is not necessarily doing this as a serious policy proposal, but rather just to draw that line and sort of throw some shade, as the kids say, on both Trump and Biden.
Or at least we think the kids might say that. Who knows? We're old.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard kids saying.
Yeah. So there we go. But I think that Donald Trump. If someone said to Donald Trump, well, okay, then this is a full and complete mental competency test. Will you agree to take it? I am sure that he would actually not agree to do that sort of thing because, well, as we know, Donald Trump, he may or may not be mentally competent. But one thing we do know is that he just kind of says stuff that he doesn't necessarily mean.
He's mentally competent, not enough to fall for that.
Yeah, right.
Let's put it that way.
All right. So let's move on to our first main story of the week. This Friday marks the one-year anniversary of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And 1 year in, the human suffering has been immense, at least 300,000 casualties, around 6.5 million internally displaced people, nearly 8 million Ukrainian refugees across Europe, according to the UN, large-scale war crimes being committed by Russian forces, and, of course, massive destruction of property infrastructure in Ukraine. And at this point, Russia currently controls around 18% of Ukraine, including Ukraine's Crimea region, which it illegally annexed back in 2014. And these gains, of course, have come, though, at a really steep cost in lives, in resources, in you'd have to say is the tattered reputation of Russia's military and those economic sanctions that, they haven't entirely crippled Russia's economy. They've certainly had a significant impact. And 1 year in, the United States has authorized around $113 billion in aid to Ukraine, and the biggest portion of that, unsurprisingly, is $50 billion in military assistance. And that makes the U.S. by far the largest source of military aid to Ukraine. Great Britain's a distant second at right around over $5 billion, followed by Poland at just over $2.5 billion, Germany a little bit less than that. Now, if we look at that, though, in terms of percentage of GDP, actually Latvia and Estonia lead the way. They're around 1% of their country's respective GDP in military aid. And just to give you
sort of a vested interest in.
Well, yeah, that's right there. Yeah, no question. And to put that into U.S. terms, that would be around $250 billion if we were to do that, roughly 5 times more than we've provided to this point. Poland's contributed around 0.6% of its GDP. The U.S. is at around 0.25%. Now, early this week, of course, President Biden made a surprise trip to Kiev in a show of support for Ukraine. And that is the first time in modern history a U.S. president has gone into a war zone not controlled by U.S. forces. It's also been reported lately that China is considering providing military assistance to Russia. Now, Chinese officials have denied this. And also, dictator Putin this week announced that Russia would be suspending its participation in the New START Treaty, which is the last remaining nuclear weapons agreement between the U.S. and Russia. And on Friday, that was yesterday, we're recording this Saturday morning, the anniversary of the invasion, the U.S. authorized $2 billion more in additional military aid to Ukraine, as well as new sanctions that target over 200 individuals and organizations that have been helping Putin continue his war. President Zelensky on the anniversary said that Ukraine could win the war this year if allies stayed united like a fist, and that Ukraine would not negotiate until Russia stopped bombing Ukraine cities and killing Ukrainian citizens. So, Jay,
that's an interesting opening there.
Well, yeah,
but yeah, go ahead.
Well, 1 year in now, what's your take on where things are with Ukraine and, your expectations or predictions for the next year of the conflict, assuming you think it will last another year or more?
So I guess my perspective is I am in a lot of cases in awe, overwhelmed, and gratified, right? In the resolve that the Ukrainians have shown in fighting for their country, in the resolve that the United States has shown, and the West in general, in terms of supporting them, keeping them militarily supplied, keeping humanitarian aid going, and not preemptively waving the white flag on Ukraine's behalf. That surprised me, pleasantly surprised me. I very much thought, like a lot of people, that Russia would militarily overwhelm Ukraine in weeks. When that didn't happen, I was still pessimistic and thought, well, you'll end up with some sort of a stalemate with the Russians holding a significant portion of Ukraine, and the West will then step in and sort of negotiate a peace that would still essentially leave Putin a winner. But neither of those things have happened. So it's not often I give props to the Biden administration, but I will give them a solid B on this. In terms of standing up for Ukraine, I said I didn't mean that, but you know what I mean. Standing up for Ukraine and keeping the weapons flowing. I hesitate to give an A or an A plus because I think there are a lot of things that could move quicker, and there has been some dithering in the administration of we have a situation in Ukraine asks for something like fighters, like tanks. And we sort of back and forth and hem and haw and eventually say yes. And then, it's going to take a while to get them there. And again, Mike, where I am, I'm still fighting the Cold War. So, I'm going to go rewatch Red Dawn, and it's sort of where I'm coming from, and I would contend this is very much in America's strategic interest to defeat the Russians, and particularly if the Chinese are going to see this as some sort of proxy war, some sort of tryout for Taiwan, or testing our resolve in foreign policy, all the more reason that the U.S. should double down on its support of the Ukraine. I said that again. I'm I'm
The
not a Putin
Ukraine,
stooge.
yeah.
Yeah. But again, it's a verbal tick from our, because we grew up for generations and it was called the Ukraine. No, so that's where I'm at. That's where I'm coming from. I mean, if you can consider what a disaster this has been for the Russians, you read numbers like 175,000 potentially dead,
Killed and wounded. Yeah, the total casualty. Sure.
And it's difficult to tell who's killed and who's wounded. But to put that in context, right? The U.S. lost, I want to say, 68,000 men in Vietnam over 15 years, and what that did to our military, our confidence, our national psyche, losing 68,000 men over 15 years. They've lost multiples of that within 1 year. I wonder if tremendous.
Well, I wonder. Yes, and no. I think we don't want to make the mistake of assuming that the Russian response is going to be the same as the U.S. response to that sort of thing, simply because there are two very different cultures. And again, which is not to discount your point entirely, just to say that.
It's a different kind of thing of you're trying to convince a whole lot of people who you're having losses at a tremendous rate, that it's not something that can go unnoticed in society.
Well,
right?
it certainly is. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think
now that they're doing dragnets to draft more people, and it's also a weird. I would have to imagine, despite all the Putin propaganda, going to fight a war with a country with which you were united with, in many people's living memories. That you do share a lot of cultural exchange and affinity, and people crossing borders and so forth. I think that has to be a tougher sell psychologically, even than saying we're sending troops to across the world to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think I fundamentally disagree. I think Putin's in a lot less trouble domestically and it seems like you think he might be, or that, I've heard some other analysts suggest that he might be. I think it's just a very different culture, media environment, milieu, as it were. And I think that Putin is firmly in control of things. And there's, Russia has a long and unfortunately storied history of throwing an awful lot of troops at all kinds of problems. Yeah. And it's a very different thing.
And again, I think that's something, culturally they would have a much more greater ability to withstand, shoulder those kind of losses that they could shoulder, but to an open democratic society like ours would be totally unacceptable.
While the war has been certainly a disaster, I think that's a fair word for Russia. I think when we think about who the war's been actually good for, I think you can make a case that it's actually been pretty good for China in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's made Russia more dependent on China. It's moved the U.S. focus from China to Russia, which potentially gives China a little bit more breathing room. And, also it lets the West dump resources into this war, weakening everyone involved except for China.
Resources that we might need later.
There you go. And and China right now is getting, and for the last year, has been getting all sorts of cut price energy from Russia. And so you can make a case that, they have maybe a strategic interest in prolonging this conflict. They nearly doubled their $41 billion in Russian energy purchases in the year before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, right? And that's helping to keep China's inflation down. And, it's just generally, I think, pretty good for China. And so when I heard about, China potentially thinking about providing military lethal aid to Russia, in a sense, if they want to ensure that this conflict goes on as long as possible and helps to bleed the West and pull Russia in and keep that cheap energy going to them. Well, I can see that as a viable strategy.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I think the Chinese want the Russians to win. Even more than they just want the thing prolonged. But no, I think you're right. I think, and I think the providing of Chinese arms is going to give sort of again, practice run. We're seeing how things operate in the field, getting ready for, what would likely be an invasion of Taiwan. So I think, yeah, in the short term, I would tend to agree with you. This has benefited China. In the long term, if the Russians get beat back significantly, then I think perhaps less so. Right. I think as I started off with, the West has shown, to me, surprising resolve on this, and I think a victory by Ukraine would send a message, would reinvigorate the West, right? Say, listen, we don't have to roll over to these dictatorial regimes that they just want to grab up other states, and would sort of stiffen our backs in terms of a response to Taiwan.
I think I'm more skeptical than you are long term. It seems unlikely that this war is going to be concluded anytime soon. I certainly don't expect it to end in 2013. There's the Center for Strategic International Studies. They took a look at wars since the end of World War II and found that more than half of the wars, interstate wars like the war in Ukraine, have ended in less than a year. But when they have gone on for more than a year, they've lasted more than a decade on average. And I think, Russia is kind of positioning itself for a long slog, assuming that the West is eventually going to tire of support. And I think, we can see some signs of this already. I mentioned that the U.S. is by far the largest military supporter of Ukraine. Something like a factor 10 times more than the UK. But, for instance, earlier this month, Matt Gaetz introduced a resolution to end all military and financial aid to Ukraine. He called it the Ukraine Fatigue Resolution, and it had 10 co-sponsors, kind of the usual suspects. You would,
it's not, yeah.
Biggs, Gosar, Taylor Greene, Massey, Boebert, a few others. But, the fact that there are 11 members of Congress who are willing to go on record as this, and it's not just that, but if you take a look at polling on support for the war, like, for instance, right now, 40% of Republicans in a Pew Research poll that was done at the end of January believe that the U.S. is giving too much support to Ukraine. And that's up from 9% in March of 2022. So, I mean, we see where these numbers are going, and, and Putin sees where these numbers are going as well. And so I think the bet is that, well, we can outlast these democracies, because sure, they might have shown some steel initially, but over time it's just going to be too much, and they're just going to tire of it. And especially we're seeing this from Republicans. Well,
I don't know if you're seeing it, I guess, in that polling, and I'm always a little skeptical about that. If you're asking a question, are we giving too much, right? I mean, that's sort of.
Well, no, it asks about how much are we? The question is the U.S. providing too much, about the right amount, or
just
not enough support?
About the right, yeah.
And Republicans, far more than Democrats, say that like I said, the plurality, actually, 40% say we're giving too much, 24% of Republicans saying about right, 17% not enough. If you look at that for Democrats,
that's me.
15% say too much, 40% say about right, and 23% say not enough. So Republicans clearly are leading the charge to cut and run in Ukraine, I guess.
Not this Republican, Mike.
Okay.
So I'm still going to take that with a grain of salt. But
why is that? I mean, because it disagrees with what you want, or no? I mean, well, yes. Really, okay.
No, and I think to some extent, when you're first of all, I think Republicans, when they're polled, do tend to lie.
Why would they lie about that? I can understand lying about support for Trump, but that makes no sense.
If you're asked, hold on a second. I would be curious if the results, on other issues were the same, right? Are we spending enough on social programs, just enough, need more, too much, or is it going to be too much? Is there going to be a bias towards all spending is too much, right? That we could cut across the board. I can see a lot of Republicans taking that position in a poll. I also do think there are Republicans who just, make stuff up to harass pollsters. But
and you think that's why? It's just something you feel in your gut, or?
No, because it's experience. People I know do it, right?
Okay, so it's anecdotal. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's anecdotal.
Okay.
But I think it's
now if the poll had said that the plurality of Republicans had your view, would you feel that they were lying to pollsters or not?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Just curious. Okay. Anyway,
what I'm saying is I have a general skepticism on how effective Republican polling on attitudes is. I guess that's what I'm starting from my general premise, right?
Yeah. Sure.
But secondly, I would say, listen, if you've got 10 members, 11 members of the House of Representatives, you can always sort of count on that handful of crazies to do the wrong thing. And they sure are. But I don't see that gaining any traction with leadership.
Well, what's it say to you?
McCarthy's been pretty clear about supporting Ukraine, as I think have most serious Republicans and Republican presidential candidates. I mean, there's been the sounding of, well, we want to, we don't want waste, fraud, and abuse, and I think it's a fair point. But I don't see any pulling away from Republican leadership on that, saying, look, we're gonna cut and run in Ukraine.
But isn't that how these things start, right? You take a look at the numbers and you get some people to kind of make an initial push, and then over time it gains a little more steam. And the fact of the matter is, of course,
but also a lot of times it doesn't.
Sure, but
right?
I mean,
a lot of times, you have the dissents and they're still cranky and they still, have their things and the polls go up or down.
So would you expect support for the war to go up over time?
I think it depends on the outcome. If it continues to look like the Ukraine, it's winnable. Yes, I think the fact that the Chinese are now have now cast their lot officially, and let's not pretend that it's otherwise, right?
Well, I would disagree with that.
I think there's a bigger argument now that this is in our national interest.
Yeah, I think you're wrong about them officially casting their lot. On the UN votes, they have abstained as opposed to voting with Russia. And while they have helped Russia sort of indirectly evade sanctions, they haven't yet given Russia direct lethal aid. There have been some dual use things that they've done. So I think they're still trying to do
one that we know of.
Right.
Two, they certainly haven't given any aid to the Ukrainians.
Well, of course not. They wouldn't. That wouldn't be in there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So it seems clear on whose side they're on.
Well, sure. I mean, but they still want to sort of straddle both of these things. They don't want to go all in with Russia, or they would have voted with Russia. They would have given Russia lethal military aid much more quickly. And Putin has been very frustrated with Beijing in general about that. So, I think because China understands that the risks of going too far, and they want to try to play both sides against each other to that extent. So,
but you'd agree that this last week has been a turning point in terms of the Russian attitude towards this. 6 months or so, we've had this conversation a couple times, and there was this sort of professions of neutrality, right? Of no, we're just we're staying out of this.
I think they're still trying to do that. They're still saying, we would like there to be peace and this sort of thing. So no, I think they still are attempting to play that role basically, because they understand that. I think going all in with Russia would probably actually stiffen our resolve and then take the focus back onto China. And so, yeah, I think that they're strategically doing a very smart thing, even though I think it's, amoral, but it's strategically, in terms of national interest, understandable at least. But, and when you think about this, I mean, certainly in terms of our ability to keep up the fight, I mean, China, right, the world's second largest economy, and but China and Russia combined together, if you throw in, I don't know, Iran, India, maybe kind of that little coalition, they just can't hold a candle to the Western coalition in terms of economic power. I compared to GDP is roughly around 52 trillion compared to about half that, like 25, 26 trillion. So, I mean, our coalition, the pro-Ukraine coalition, is much stronger economically, certainly. But of course, as you mentioned earlier in the segment, that dictatorships, that non-democratic regimes have a certain advantage in carrying on these wars, at least, for a period of time, because they're not democratically accountable. So, but I don't think I asked you this directly. Do you see this war ending in 2023?
Yeah, I think that was one of your predictions, right?
Okay, so you do see it. Okay.
Year's prediction was I thought that there would be, I think we're hearing about this, the next big Russian push that's coming. I think hopefully that will fail. And at that point, the Russians have to do some hard thinking. Putin has to do some hard thinking.
I see. Yeah, I don't think so at all. I think that, according to at least some reports, the current funding that's been appropriated by Congress for Ukraine is going to run out sometime this summer. And I think there's going to be a big fight over more funding with those kind of middle group, right? The Getzes and Masseys and those folks kind of making that point that we don't want to do any funding, but what I think something will pass, be much smaller, and we'll see support continue to dwindle, and support to pull out become much greater, at least, stop the aid. We're not in there directly. And so I think these are things that Putin and Xi are looking toward, and just assume that all they really have to do is kind of stick in there for a little while longer, and the Republicans are going to give them a big assist.
Wow.
That's my take.
You're like the opposite of like Radio Free Europe. You know what I mean? You're just saying like, give up.
No, I'm saying that that's what your party is going to more and more do, and it's going to.
I think there will be the grandstanders, isolationists that you've always had. You had them in World War I, you had them in World War II, you had them in Vietnam. But I don't think it's going to dramatically change the trajectory of this, because I think the majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats and I'd say the totality, I think at this point of the foreign policy institutions, right, have recognized that this is a bigger fight than they thought it was at first, when it was just going to be a rollover sort of thing. And I think there's going to be impetus to keep up support and help the Ukrainians win.
I think that the polling that I've seen suggests otherwise, and I think you're rejecting that polling because you would like to
Never
believe.
Listen to this show yet.
Because I think you would like to believe in this, as in so many other things, that the Republican Party is the Republican Party that you remember growing up, and that you are at this point essentially a rhino, and that the party has moved on from the sort of things that you think are important, and that's hard to accept, and I get that. And so you want the GOP to be better than what it is, but it's just not.
Well, it's true. I do want the GOP to be better than what it is.
Me too. We agree on that.
Also, looking at if I'm a Republican and the message I'm making in 2024, the argument I'm making is we shouldn't be spending this much on foreign wars. I would much rather be taking the tack of, we need to be stronger internationally and respected internationally. Look at Afghanistan. don't make this another situation of we had a winnable war. Something like 93% of the Russian military is deployed to Ukraine. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
Again, if I'm General Patton, right? Patton, of course, famously wanted to keep going, right? And attack after defeating the Germans. This is, this could be a Waterloo type moment for what has been the Russian Empire for years and years and years. That even after the Soviet Union collapsed, right, there was still this military power. I think this is, quite honestly, it could be the end of the Russian Empire. And I think that would be a fantastic thing. So I think
be careful what you wish for
from Republican candidates who are going to say, listen, this is the kind of fight that we ought to be in. This is what we stand for internationally, is preventing this sort of aggression.
Yeah, except that the two leading Republican candidates don't seem to be taking that position, really, which is problematic. I mean, DeSantis is making noises kind of in the let's focus on our problems here at home sort of thing, which is sort of that isolationist America first, Fortress America thing. And Donald Trump has been kind of, I think, in that camp. And so
Mike, my position is always like, I'd rather the government just leave me the hell alone at home. And take care of the foreign problems. To me, that's sort of what I hire them for, right? But
it's just definitely puts you. Yeah, we will see. All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we will get back and move domestically and talk a little bit about Speaker McCarthy, Tucker Carlson, and the January 6th surveillance tapes. This week, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy gave Fox News, I can't call him a news personality, I guess, Tucker Carlson exclusive access to thousands of hours of surveillance footage from the January 6th Capitol attack. And this was a fairly controversial decision. Now, McCarthy defended it in saying, I promised. I was asked in the press about these tapes, and I said they do belong to the American public. I think sunshine lets everybody make their own judgment. And McCarthy has said that he's had conversations as well about making the footage available to other media outlets at some future date, though for right now, the only person who has that is Tucker Carlson. And just to remind folks, he is a guy who created a falsehood-filled 3-part documentary called Patriot Purge. This is on January 6th, which it was argued, and among other things, that January 6th was a false flag operation in which FBI agents incited the Capitol breach as a way to smoke out and prosecute so-called patriots. And I got to say, Jay, I'm fairly disgusted by this, actually, and I don't necessarily disagree with McCarthy's point that the media should have access to the tapes and about, sunshine and letting people make their own judgment. Yeah, absolutely. But I can't see much of a justification for, first off, giving one member of the media exclusive access. And even if you can make a case for that, the idea that the person that you select is someone who for years now has dealt in lies and has made it clear that he is not a journalist. He's an entertainer. I mean, he said so on the record. Why you would do that, like I said, I find it disgusting, and I wanted to get your take on it.
It would not have been my first choice, I guess. But Tucker Carlson asked for the stuff, had been asking for it. I think there's a little bit of Republicans playing the sort of the turnabout as fair play, right? I mean, Democrats have done this for years of saying, oh, we're going to do a release or we're going to do the interview, but we're going to do it with our particularly favorable news outlet. So I get that. My preference would be release it to everybody at the same time, and do it that way. I don't know if there's some signaling going on to the Trumpists that, hey, I'm not just caving or something like that, while still not doing anything substantive by giving this to Tucker Carlson first. I don't know. But my sense is I think it should be given out to everybody at once. But I understand the inclination of saying, you know what, we played the game for years where stuff gets leaked to the New York Times or the Washington Post first, and other outlets don't get it right away. So that's what, we're going to do this. And so my sense is he's sort of trolling Democrats and folks like you, sort of doing this, right? So. Yeah.
And if that isn't disgusting, I don't know what is. That person third in line for the presidency, the top Republican elected Republican is deciding to play games with this to own the libs by giving this information to a man. I think you would agree, a man of incredibly low character who deals in lies on a regular basis and has admitted doing that. I mean, how can you? You just think it's like a funny stunt or what?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, again, I don't quite understand. I guess I'm more perplexed at the reaction this has gotten. That, okay, Tucker Carlson gets this first, so we're really mad about this because Tucker Carlson may well be a horrible person. I guess I just don't see the. Well,
plenty of people are horrible people.
Outrage.
I don't care
who should have gotten it first.
There are plenty of.
Should Tucker Carlson be precluded from getting these tapes because he's a horrible person?
Yeah, but there are plenty of people on the right who are strong, steadfast conservatives who are not. Who might be terrible people, but who are not known liars, who care, or at least ostensibly care about the truth. And Tucker Carlson is not one of those people. They could have given the information to the Wall Street Journal, for instance, or National Review, or all kinds of other organizations.
Sure. No,
but they chose.
I would have preferred.
Yeah, but it sounds like
that wouldn't have drawn the same reaction from you that it's drawing.
But you don't see any harm in doing this. You don't see any harm in
not particularly.
You don't see any harm in giving special treatment to people who deal in lies, who that's their thing. I mean, has since 2016 with Donald Trump taught you nothing about the danger of giving special treatment and promoting serial liars, people with no moral compass who are almost proudly amoral.
Right. So how do you feel about Tucker Carlson?
I mean, but he is a
no. My point is look, if I guess I'm still what is it that you're afraid Tucker Carlson will do with this that Bret Baier would not?
Well, I think that
or why is it that you're upset that Tucker Carlson has it first, other than you really dislike Tucker Carlson, which I don't like him either, but
it's not about dislike. It's about my
known liar. Yes.
Yeah. So that's a whole different sort of thing. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of reporters on the left that I would dislike as human beings. So it's about what we know he does with facts. I would have just as much of a problem if the sole person to get it would be Michael Moore for similar reasons. Because Tucker Carlson has been on record as saying things that are just colossally false and damaging. This idea that he put together a 3-part documentary that said, hey, the FBI incited this false flag operation. And so then you say, well, we'll give this guy exclusive access to all of these tapes because we know what he's going to do with them, right? He's going to take stuff and cut it up and use it in such a way to present a narrative that supports what he's already said. And so that I find to be morally reprehensible. And that's why I have a problem with Tucker Carlson, not because I think he's a ridiculous, awful human being, which I do, but because of the damage that this sort of thing does to, I think in general, the pursuit of any sort of truth or honesty in journalism.
So I guess I just take a different view fundamentally. Look, if this had been a situation where the Democrats had said we're going to issue this stuff to Michael Moore, in the first instance, give him first crack at it, I would have rolled my eyes. I would have said that's ridiculous. But I wouldn't have the reaction that I think you and others on the left are having. And that's why I think this is sort of a McCarthy's winding you up and living rent free in your head, as it were.
Well, it's not. It's not about that.
I don't see. So I guess the other piece is I don't see so much. We view threats of damage, of harm differently, right? Tucker Carlson can go out and say all kinds of untrue things, and Michael Moore can go out and say all kinds of untrue things. I don't see that as, oh my gosh, that's something that has to be stopped, prevented. We have to destroy these people, or they shouldn't be allowed access to the information, or they shouldn't be allowed to do this. I think it's just all right, well, let's make sure everybody gets the information, and
I agree, but it's one thing. But it's one thing to say, well, we shouldn't deny this person access because we disagree with their views. It's something else entirely to say, well, let's find this most radical lying person and give this person special exclusive access. That's a whole different sort of thing. And it's not about just winding. It's not about winding up. It's about what he's going to do with this information, the narrative that he is almost certainly going to strengthen through selective and dishonest use of this footage to make more and more, to just further solidify this belief among tens of millions of Americans that have been lied to by Fox News for many years now, that this whole January 6th thing was a sham, and that Donald Trump is the rightful president. And I find that disgusting. And it's not just about winding me up. It's about pushing untruths for profit and rewarding people who do that. And I find that just to be morally wrong.
Okay. Well, so do I guess. But I guess nevertheless, you are wound up.
I am. I think it's,
and I think that was the intent. But look, to me, it's sort of okay. So let's say you're right, and Tucker Carlson does parse through this. It's something like ungodly amount of hours of footage, right? Because there's all these cameras doing all these things. It's 20,000 hours or something. So supposing he does come through this and finds a couple frames of, you got some veterans just walking in and saluting the flag or something like that, right? As these others ransack the Capitol. Again, to my mind, it's sort of, okay, he puts that out there. So what? As long as all the other outlets are able to get this, or able to say,
we don't know that they are
in context.
And
I expect they will be. Let's going to be.
You have a lot more
legally,
faith in.
Legally, they will be able to get it. There's not going to be any defense if someone comes and sues and says, "Hey, we want access to this as a public record," and the Congress says no. We only give it out to people we like. I mean, that's a dead bang loser in court. So of course they're going to be allowed access. And besides which, McCarthy has said that they'll be given access.
No, he didn't
so
say that they would be.
Here's the way, and maybe this comes a little bit from what my life in litigation, right, is each side puts on its case, and the other side, happens all the time, right? Get up and they say all sorts of things that I believe, and in many cases absolutely know for sure and have evidence of, are absolutely totally untrue. They twist the facts. They say things that are terrible. They make horrible misrepresentations. But what you do is you sit there and you listen to it, and then you get up and you put on your case. And that's, I guess maybe that's just the way I view this differently than you do. It's sort of if they have put a witness on the stand who lies and says all sorts of ridiculous things, and is a horrible, shameful person, and they give him evidence that is misused and twisted. I think the response is, okay, you sit there and wait patiently, and then when it's your turn, you can cross-examine that witness, and you can put on your own evidence to say, no, this is not what happened. And I guess I'm more comfortable with that than I think maybe you are, right? Well, this idea of people saying stuff that is offensive, not true, is just plain bonkers.
Because I believe that version of reality that you just sketched out, that process, has almost nothing to do. It might have a lot to do with your job, your day job, but I think it has almost nothing to do with how the real world works. outside of a courtroom. The idea that people will listen to both sides impassively as if the public is in this jury box, paying careful attention and focusing on the fact, I find that to be so far removed from how most real people act in the world that it seems just ludicrous to me.
No, I think you're right. It's not a matter of people paying close attention to all the various facts, but they do develop senses of things over time, right? And when it shows up that Tucker Carlson's been wrong about this and this and this and this and this, and he's shown to have said things, and again, it's difficult. I mean, Carlson is an opinion journalist, right? Opinion, sort of by definition, cannot be false. It's that sort of thing. But he said all this stuff. It hasn't been the case. It's been disputed and contradicted and what's the word I'm looking for that everyone likes to use?
Debunked
these days. Debunked.
Except it hasn't been. As you said, he says things that are unfalsifiable by his own standards. This is how conspiracy theory thinking works.
Yeah.
Is you can always just say, well, yeah, that's what they want you to believe. But hey, just like when I brought, a minor version of it, right? I bring forth a poll earlier in the show, and I say, listen, 40% of Republicans think we're giving too much aid to Ukraine, and your immediate response is, well, I don't really trust that poll, and that's just a small version. Of course you don't, because it disagrees with what you want to be the truth. And so that makes it much more difficult. And you are a rational, intelligent, open-minded person as Republicans go, as people go, in fact. But most people don't rise to that standard. And so that's why this idea that somehow Tucker Carlson being debunked by whatever, I don't know, PolitiFact or something, why that means anything in the real world? No, of course it doesn't.
I don't think it means anything coming from PolitiFact, but that's another story.
But it doesn't mean anything coming from anyone.
Let's put it this way. If I say, listen, I don't know that I'm buying that poll. If further polls continue to show that, if they continue to show that, and the trend increases, I will be proven wrong. Right? I will say, no, I guess that poll must be pretty accurate.
But see, you might not. And here's why I say that, because your premise was, well, Republicans lie to pollsters. And so that premise would still hold true, whether it's one poll, well, they're just lying to pollsters in 12 polls. Well, of course, we would expect the same thing. It's so easy to rationalize, to justify this thing, to create the world that in the way we would like to believe it is. And, like I said, you are, I think, at a much higher level than I know you are at a much higher level than most other folks. And yet, you I think, gave a great example of that. And we see that to a much greater degree in, I think, most of the Fox News listening or watching public.
All right. So I guess my point is I'm not saying, to be clear, I'm not saying your poll didn't happen. I'm saying I'm skeptical of the results. Yeah. I'm not saying the poll was faked or false. I'm saying some Republicans lie to pollsters because they do. I'm saying that sometimes there is in polling, particularly polling done by news organizations, there is a push poll type mentality, right, to try to come up with a response for a story that they want to get. I think it's less so in actual political polling where the results really matter and they're trying to get real numbers. And I think those types of numbers are easy to generate. I could point to there are polls out there saying that something like 40% of Democrats believed that people who were unvaccinated should be put in camps. Now that strikes me as a bit high. I'm certain there's probably 15 or 20% of Democrats who feel that way, but what I'm saying is I have doubts over that same poll, just because I think that the results don't seem to mesh necessarily with reality, and I think
with your reality,
past. No, but I'm saying, but with that one, I ought to be predisposed to believe that 40% of Democrats wanted to see unvaccinated people in camps.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And what I'm saying is no. I just anytime you get those sorts of big numbers for something that seems fairly extreme, and I guess the other question is too much, not enough, right? I mean, that's such a very my point is I'm not a whole denier, but I am a skeptic, and I think it's healthy to be skeptical on these things. Now Tucker Carlson, I think has sometimes carries skepticism to an unhealthy level, where it goes beyond just I'm not sure I believe the official account to here is a entire counter narrative that's not factually supported.
You don't think that's what he's actually doing, that he's being skeptical? You don't really
No, I think he's just trying to rev up the base to make money for ratings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that. You're not suggesting.
What I'm saying is I think it's very much appropriate to say, hey, this is what the government says. I'm skeptical. So
Sure.
For example, let's go back to January 6th. One of the major stories coming out of January 6th was a deadly riot coup. One of the examples that they cited most often, cited on the floor of the Senate, in the well of the Senate, trying to impeach President Trump, over and over again, there was a policeman who was bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher, except that never happened. And the people who were saying this had reason to know it didn't happen then. This guy was never hit with a fire extinguisher. He was at the riot. He had a stroke later that day afterwards. Now, you can certainly say this contributed to the stress and stroke and all that, and that's certainly a fair argument, but it's certainly completely different than being bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher.
Absolutely.
Yet that was repeated so many times. And I think I made this point before. I even sort of had this kind of quasi made up memory of,
me too.
On the video?
Yep,
Maybe
sure.
I did.
Absolutely.
So what I'm saying is there was a whole lot of misinformation that has come out over this, and I think there are still mysteries, right, about things that did happen. We're still not clear on these other deaths that occurred, how they occurred, why they occurred. Tucker Carlson expressed skepticism on that, and in that case, he was right.
But okay, fine.
And others, and look, he's made stuff up. But let's. What I'm saying is, to me, the way the system works is you can have your. It's almost healthy to have someone like a Tucker Carlson, even when they're wrong, because it keeps the government honest. And vice versa,
that's where I disagree with you. I think it's healthy to have skeptics, but it's not healthy to have amoral liars. That they don't contribute anything. He doesn't give a damn about the truth. He doesn't give a damn about the country. I think he is a despicable human being, and bringing despicable human beings in simply because they happen to be making their money and gaining their power at this moment by pretending to be skeptics, that doesn't advance any useful, valuable thing.
The other thing that could be accomplished by this, and you would say this wouldn't happen because he's a terrible person. But supposing Tucker sits through the 20,000 hours of footage and says, "Oh man, that really was bad."
Wow. Yeah. Come on.
I know you say that won't happen. But I think there's also the sort of corollary if Tucker Carlson sits through the 20,000 hours and doesn't come out with some new bombshell saying, "Aha, look, here's the FBI false flag. Here's evidence of the FBI false flag job." Again, those claims ought to recede.
Well,
right?
First off, Tucker
and people
Carlson
say, look, the guy had all the evidence here and he still couldn't come out. It's sort of the release the Kraken type thing.
That's
right?
That's not how it's going to work. Number one, Tucker Carlson probably will watch almost none of this. This is what interns and staff are for, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure
some of it. I mean,
well, it will be watched with the instruction, find something that looks good, that fits the narrative. But I can guarantee you that Tucker Carlson at no point is going to come on the air and say, "You know what? I was wrong. I watched this footage and things weren't what I was saying." He is going to, I guarantee you, 100%. I'm positive.
I I think you're right. Yeah.
So again, this is why I blame. Well, I almost don't blame Tucker Carlson, because he is who he is, and he's this despicable human being, and you can't, the scorpion's going to be the scorpion. But it's Kevin McCarthy, who sometimes it's actually the weak people, the people who are so thirsty, so desperate for power to stay in power, who actually enable these awful people. And so in a way, I think Kevin McCarthy is more at fault, because Kevin McCarthy at least had you can make some argument that he is a moral actor as opposed to Tucker Carlson. But clearly this suggests that it doesn't really matter as much as, attempting to appease his right flank.
That's a fair argument to make.
All right. All right, then.
But I know, I guess I keep coming back to Tucker Carlson will get this information eventually, right? If it's shared with everyone. Your biggest issue is that he is somehow being highlighted and given preferential treatment by getting it first.
Yes, exactly.
And then that sets a bad example, because as a bad actor, he should not be rewarded for his bad behavior.
There you go. And also getting it first, he gets to have the first crack at sort of creating the narrative that a lot of folks.
Yeah, but I'd always rather have the second crack than the first. Right? I'd always much rather be able to do the rebuttal and say, hey, here's what he said, and this isn't true. Let me show you. I think that's always the much stronger position to be in. But
maybe in a courtroom, I would.
All right.
But anyway. All right. Well, on that note, we will end. But let's talk about recommendations. I don't know, Jay, do you have any recommendations for this week?
Gosh, I'm afraid I don't.
You don't? Well, I have one.
Other than can't wait for the tapes to come out. And everybody should watch those.
Yeah, definitely. See if Tucker maybe will let you into the we'll let you into the screening room, and you can watch some tapes with Tucker. But I actually have a recommendation. This one is for a song from one of my favorite bands of all time. I don't know if you probably know them. They're very lowbrow. So Jay, you probably don't. Called Nerf Herder. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Oh, I know Nerf Herder, of course.
Okay. Well, they released a song, I guess it's a little while ago, but I just came across it this last week, called "We All Got COVID," and it's a fun song. Not too many fun songs about getting COVID, but I enjoyed it, and it's classic sort of Nerf Herder style, and I would say it's well worth. I don't know, it's probably the 2 minutes and 32 seconds or something like that that you would pay. I'll make sure I have a link for that on there. So you want something a little lighter and fun, and if you didn't think getting COVID could be fun, well, you're probably right. It certainly wasn't fun for me, but I think it's a fun song, and I really enjoy Nerf Herder. So there you go. All right. So Before we do, I should let everyone know that if you are not already a supporter of the Politics Guys, we do hope you'll consider becoming one. And I should point out as well that we have the first month now of support on Patreon on us, free. Just sign up for nothing, see if you like it, that sort of thing. And you can do that at patreon.com/politicsguys. And if you're a supporter, you get ad-free versions of everything. You get our full midweek show, so some good stuff, and also membership in our Discord group, which is always very active and fun and interesting. So again, to check it all out, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also become a supporter through us on Venmo. It's @politicsguys, or through PayPal. And all support links are in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get that midweek show, but you just can't financially support the show at this point, not a problem. Send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you all set up. And if you'd like to just get in touch with us for whatever reason, if you're a supporter, of course, you can do it on the Discord. There's our Facebook and Twitter accounts, and the links to that are in the show notes as well, or just old-fashioned email, mail@politicsguys.com. And finally, as always, a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.